We know them as the winged choosers of the flame and the fierce female warriors of Valhalla. But who are the Valkyries really? Are they divine escorts, mortal women with supernatural gifts, or something else entirely? Or perhaps all of the above? Today, we're pulling back the veil on these enigmatic wish-maidens to explore how they evolved from the terrifying omens of Old Norse poetry into the complex heroines of modern fantasy. I'm joined by an incredible panel. Authors K.S. Barton and Johanna Wittenberg, the co-hosts of Shieldmaiden Women of the Viking World podcast, and academic researcher Sif Brookes from the Valsif channel. Together, we're exploring and examining the sagas, the legends, and the 21st century conceptions in Valkyries beyond the sagas and legends. Join us as we head straight to Valhalla to find out what it truly means to choose the flame. Welcome everyone to the Valhalla Conversations podcast, and in this very exciting episode on my favourite catnip topic of all things Norse on Valkyries, I'm delighted to have an excellent panel made up of my three guests. And I would like them to introduce themselves, and we will start off with Kim. Please go first.
All right, great. So I'm K.S. Barton. I'm the author of the Norse family trilogy, in which a young Viking woman and a Viking warrior are caught in a deadly blood feud between two brothers. Other than that, I have written, total I've written 6 novels where I explore themes of family, honor, and strength, all within the backdrop of Norse society. When doing research on Norse mythology for a teaching project many years ago, I discovered the sagas, and I immediately knew that I wanted to write fiction about Vikings. So, and as you said, I am the co-host with Johanna on the podcast Shieldmaidens, Women of the Norse World. And this month, April, is the 3-year anniversary of our podcast.
Oh, congratulations.
So, thank you. And I also, we're going to be mentioning Flame Tree Publishing anthology that's all about Valkyries. And I recently found out that I have a short story accepted in an upcoming anthology called The Tarot of Love it's a romantic fantasy story that's Viking inspired.
Oh, very intrigued.
It's called the Poet's Challenge.
Ooh. Another bit of Norse poetry. Thank you very much, Kim, and I'm delighted
to have me
again back on the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself and your wonderful works?
Yeah, sure. Where to begin? I am a current MA Medieval Studies student at Leeds University. I am a member of MATER, which is the Medievalists Against the Extreme Right. I am a member of Necron, which is the network of early career researchers in Old Norse. I am also an organising committee member of the student-led Norse in the North Conference between the universities of Leeds, York and Durham. I am the author of Valkyria, Servant or Master. And ultimately, I am endeavouring to become a Valkyric scholar with a research specialisation on ritualised liminality, pre-Christian religious practices, and the Valkyria. My MA dissertation is on reframing the Valkyria as potentially blotgithia, ritualised sacrifice priestesses of the battlefield. So, and I very much want to do my PhD in that space as well, but I'm very much happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, we connected online a good few months back, just because I can't even remember how or when or why. I think we just had the word Valkyries come up. I think it was on a Facebook post over something Valkyrie. And I was like, you need to tell me more about your research. Can I just throw this short story at you? Can I throw this presentation at you? Can someone else who likes Valkyries as much as me read what I'm doing? And thankfully, you didn't tell me to quietly just shoo off, basically.
I would never do that. No, it's been fascinating to hear all these things you're doing. It's really cool.
Well, I'm envious of you doing it academically fully, because I would love to if I had the time and the money and the energy and wasn't 6 months pregnant and also having a 5-year-old and just general work and logistics, because we both live not far from each other in our part of the UK. And I know you're probably aware of how much a black hole my area of West Yorkshire is for trains.
It is.
Cannot get out, let alone get in. So, but I'm delighted to have you. And of course, I've had your book and I featured it in my research, humbly, because it's got some epic quotes in there. And you just state so much of what I have come to learn and realise. And I'm looking forward for you to share all that wonderful knowledge with our viewers and listeners today. So thank you, Sif.
Thank you.
And last but by no means least, Johanna, please introduce yourself and your wonderful works.
Thank you for having me. I'm Johanna Wittenberg. I'm the author of the Norse Women series, which is right now an 8-book series. I just published the 8th book in early April, which is the Irish Queen. And it concerns Vikings in fairyland, of all things. But the book is based on the life of Queen Osa, who was a real Norse queen who we have about a paragraph about her in Snorri. And so I took that paragraph and wrote the first book, and then I started to imagine what the rest of her life might have been like. But my books are historical fantasy, because you really can't, I don't think you can write about the Viking age without having magic in it, because they lived, ate and breathed magic. So there's definitely, but my magic is very careful to follow the rules of the sagas and everything I've researched. So I'm also very, very excited to have this podcast with you all, because I'm just having a short story published in the Flame Tree Press Valkyries, the Valkyries anthology, and that will be out the middle of May. So this is great. I'm so excited.
Yes, I was very excited when I learned about that book. I bravely and boldly put forward my very meagre and humble creative writing skills to try and get in it. Didn't quite get there, but it's fine. But I'm delighted to know someone who has. And of course, I'm looking forward to reading your short story in it as well, seeing how else modern authors depict Valkyries, because of course, depiction, representation, and of course, the issue of misinformation and misconception is a big thing, So, Valkyries, ladies. Valkyries, as you know, they are in fact women. At least they're always described as female spirits, female entities. I have certainly kind of, in my humble deep dive of research over the past 2 years, have discovered that they have got some loose connections to the Disir or other types of female spirits. I personally have read lots of fantasy fiction set in Viking Age, or at least with Norse mythology heavily involved, and their depictions vary, but they're all equally recognisable as Valkyries to some degree. There's some iconography, some symbolism. Of course, we can all point the finger at Wagner, because he set so much of the aesthetic look down with his costume designer, Emil Colin Doppler, if I can ever pronounce that name. But I know, of course, Kim and Johanna, you're historical fiction writers of the Viking Age. These are the people that believed in these spiritual women. How did you approach kind of like featuring or even discussing Valkyries in your creative works, if at all? Because I apologise, I haven't read them all yet, but I will do at some point. Who would like to go first?
Well, my short story, To Please the Gods, which is the one that's coming out in this anthology, I took one of my characters who, in my second book, who had an experience in the battlefield, and I told it from her point of view, the same experience, but I told it from this character's point of view. And for me, the Valkyrie is definitely a swan maiden, but also a battlefield chooser of the slain. That's the main thing that I've always represented them as.
That's a good point. How about you, Kim? Did they feature much in your writings? Or not as directly?
No, I don't think so.
Did A Deal with Odin have Valkyries in it?
I read that book. Oh, I always forget about that.
I love that book. It's a standalone, but I really like that book.
Yeah, I did have Valkyries in there. Yeah, because my main character, her husband dies and is taken to Valhalla, and she makes a deal with Loki and he takes her to
Oh.
Valhalla. And once they're there, she meets two Valkyries, I think, Gondel and
Yes.
Skogul. Skogul? Wait.
Oh yes, the famous ones from King Hakon the Good's death.
Yeah. And yeah,
His
so,
death.
and when she gets to Valhalla, her presence there kind of causes chaos and she can't get out. So the Valkyries try to help her get out. The gate's locked and she can't get out. And three gods try to help her get out through the gate, over the wall, whatever. And
Gosh.
so then she ends up having to make a deal with Odin to get out of Valhalla and stop the chaos. So yeah, there are Valkyries.
I need to read it. Sounds awesome.
That's a good one. I like it.
Can I show it? It's oops.
Yeah, please do.
I love the cover. I love this
Wonderful
cover.
Oh,
It's a
wow,
great
that is
cover.
gorgeous.
And it's a short book, so you wouldn't be investing too much time to read it.
Oh no, please do.
Yes,
please do.
but I don't have Valkyries in my trilogy unless it's just like in passing. They might mention them.
Yeah.
Maybe some of the warriors might mention them, but it's been a while since I've written those books and I can't remember.
No worries at all.
They are mentioned in the book I'm working on right now, though. So
I guess that's an interesting thing, and this is of course where Sif's wonderful knowledge and expertise comes in, because there's one thing to how we of the 21st century visualize and imagine Valkyries are and how they behave, what they act, what they look like, what they can and cannot do, because I think agency is a real interesting issue for these beings. But equally, we're so unsure, at least, about what the actual pre-Christian people of Scandinavia, because I never know whether to call them pagans or heathens without causing offence, believed in and what they understood. Because I can remember when that little silverine figurine was found in Hedeby in Denmark, I believe, and that is now always commonly known as the Valkyrie. Oh, Kim's got one.
She's a friend of our podcast. She's always here on my desk when we record.
Oh yes, she's the icon of your podcast, isn't she?
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry,
and she's also on the cover of Sif's book, right?
Yeah, on the interior.
Yeah. So yeah, it's strange how she's not been classed as a Shieldmaiden, which is, of course, is the other enigma of identity and representation that gets blended together. It's something that I did get encouraged to address in my own humble research, not just what Valkyries are, but why they're different to Shieldmaidens and why Shieldmaidens are different to Valkyries and all that in between. So I guess, Sif, would you mind giving our viewers and listeners maybe a bit of a 101 on what a Valkyrie could have been, because we can never say for sure, unfortunately.
I mean, yeah, it's a really interesting topic, because at the conference I was at the last week, we were talking about character groupings in classical and medieval literature. And during that, I was basically saying that there is a through line of feminine battle spirits that are related to death and fate and all of this. That really stems from the classical period, and we see this like through line go through. Well, it's a broken line, but there's themes that carry on throughout, and it does stem from the Furies. And this idea of kind of like quite vengeful spirits of like the Valkyries are different, of course, they haven't all the same characteristics, but there's strong associations with storms as well, wind, obviously death and destruction and carnage and all of that. The Anglo-Saxon Old English Valkyrien is also interesting because it is glossed with the classical Furies. So there is an association there in the minds of the people, and obviously we get that with the Nordic Valkyria, which obviously their name, as we know, means choosers of the slain. And that's doing a lot of heavy lifting in terms of their duties, even though it has been interpreted in different ways over the periods. There is a tendency for the modern period to kind of disassociate them with kind of agency and independence and be like, well, we're going to watch the battle unfold and we'll pick the dead up after it's all happened. But that's not how we see it in the medieval literature, at least. The Norse sagas and stories, there is way more agency in terms of choosing actively who are going to die and who are going to live, which honestly kind of reframes a lot of the kind of the mythos, the cosmic space in terms of the position of the Valkyries with the gods and mortal life. But yeah, there's about 50 we have named Valkyries. I pointed out that there is a nice kind of like grouping pattern where they tend to be singular in kind of like the heroic sagas, tend to be in pairs around pre and post Eddic poetry, and then they're in multiples of 3, with I think only one instance of it being more than 12. I think it's Gylfaginning, potentially Snorri's writing, where he puts 13 Valkyries together, which I think it's an anomaly, but I think it's to kind of fit the poetic pattern, the meter necessary for that piece. But yeah, there's their representation, the way they behave, their characterization changes quite dramatically over pre and post conversion. And yeah, to put it bluntly, they are very kind of animalistic, very feral, very kind of almost that Fury-esque primal kind of like behavior we're seeing of them. And then over the period of conversion and the move from wild spaces in terms of worship, sacred groves that are quite goddess oriented, at least I follow the reasoning by Professor Terry Gunnell there, and I'm very much in that kind of like school of thought, to hall-based worship, where obviously it was more patriarchal. And they become more domesticated, more tamed. They take on other qualities. In Eric Small, we have them becoming mead bringers, and that sticks. Snorri was obviously very invested in that. He was familiar with the work. And then they become the daughters of kings, wives of heroes, moving into that more heroic period. And then more further past conversion, they're once again the kind of demonic figures of kind of like pagan past, kind of lurking in dreams and nightmares, and really kind of like hounding the people. So yeah, we are kind of like bouncing around. Obviously, we're back to more the romanticized kind of figure in the modern period. But yeah, it's an interesting kind of evolution.
Thank you. That is a really wonderful introduction, and you've covered a lot. And then I know there's so much more, so much more you could talk to us about. So although Valkyries haven't featured in your writing, Kim, directly or too much indirectly, what are your thoughts about Valkyries as the figures that they could have been, were, or are now?
Well, the story I wrote for the anthology that did not get picked up, which is fine. She was, I kind of did a little bit of both. Like, I had her be like she was a daughter of a king, but she had magical powers to like, her name was Mist, and she could like muddle people's minds and make them cloudy and do things to them. Anyway, so when she becomes a Valkyrie, she has some agency. She's the one who's choosing whose, minds to create the mist and confuse them and stuff. So anyway, but yeah, I actually have an affinity for the really old ones, the ones from I forget this. I can never remember the names. The Irish one where they're using like the skulls for the weights and the intestines for the
Jarl Saga, yeah.
Jarl Saga, that's right. Yeah.
And don't try to pronounce the name of the poem.
It's like a story within a poem, isn't it? Because every time I researched, I thought, why have I got 2 different names for the same thing? I'm getting very confused.
Oh, it's Dorand, right? That's the name of the guy. I was just looking it up. But yeah, I just love that image of them. I like that, as you said, Sif, that more feral depiction of these women, and the fact that they were weaving the fate of the battle themselves. They weren't just like Odin told us to go make this king win or what, and then just doing what they were bidden. These were the women who were controlling it. But I'm also still kind of a sucker for a romantic hero tale too. So I'm, honestly, I'm just good with all of it, except for like the modern depictions when they have like they're made like super sexy and stuff. That stuff just makes me crazy. But I understand where it's coming from. But yeah, I'm not. But I mean, it is kind of a romanticized version of these women. But it makes no sense for warriors to be exposing that much skin.
Among other things, among many other things, we speak about the female anatomy and armor. Yeah, I know it's a common problem in just fantasy games overall. Unfortunately, I think being a fantasy game player myself. Sif, would you mind telling us a bit more about that wonderfully epic and gruesome poem that Kim has just referred to?
Oh, honestly, it's probably my favorite Valkyrie piece in literature. I know that's kind of like a high bar, but it's what I find really fascinating is that all signs point to the poetry being older than the prose it's surrounded by. There's a lot of conversations around it's not quite matching the battle it's describing, which is fascinating. And yes, we have this idea of 12 women entering a dinga, which is a kind of a weaving room on the battlefield, which itself is kind of positioned as a bit of a liminal space. It's not really supposed to be there. It's a bit mysterious. And Dorothy, he witnesses these women who he mistakes for men on first kind of glance, presumably because they're wearing their brinja, they're male. And then he looks through this window and he sees these 12 women weaving with like spears, blood besprinkled, all that awesome kind of heads for the weights we use, and it's really cool. And what we get there, which I find really fascinating, is this very clear cause and effect. So we're weaving, swords are clashing, shields are breaking. There is a pattern for the poetry that is like they're doing something that's happening outside, and it's all being witnessed by this third party. I absolutely, again, I adore that piece because it is so. It takes a really like stark glimpse at how these figures were believed to act, how they were portrayed in arguably pre-Christian society. So we do have this glimpse of this through the window of these practices and ritualism, and obviously we have a very strong connection there potentially with Seidr and textile magic and women's work, and this very obviously it's heavily associated with Odin, but also with Freya, and that in itself is fascinating because that is an area of research which is burgeoning and constantly growing. I'm thinking like Leszek Gardea and Neil Price, those figures that are doing some incredible work in that space. But yeah, there's so much to kind of glean from that, and yeah, it's also like the animalistic imagery, like the helmet hound. It's very kind of like evocative, but yeah, it's awesome.
But yes, that wonderful poem about the kind of like the women, the Valkyries, because I've come across it in my research because of course, nice. That's another book inspired by it. Yes, Valkyries Loom.
Yes, and that's an awesome picture of that poem. So the book is great too, but which you cite in your book.
I do, yeah,
several times.
It's good. It's very good. Can only recommend.
Yeah.
Yes. There's not that many good books out there about Valkyries besides Sif's own. I know I have purchased the odd couple off Amazon and found one really good because it's written by an American guy who's also part of a heathen, pagan, pre-Christian group. And he touches a lot of what Sif touches on, but without less detail and without less academic depth. But then the other book I had was completely written by AI. So again, dear viewers and listeners, please be careful when buying books from Amazon because there's now a lot of AI just stuff out there now. But these wonderful women, you can buy their books and you can trust them. I guarantee it.
Yeah. No AI in my stuff.
No AI.
No, I mean, that's one of the benefits of writing about Valkyrie stuff, though, because if you do use AI, you can easily spot it because it'd be doing the same misconceptions over and over again, and you're just like, well, that's wrong. So,
yes, I'm not even going to get them on screen because it's just not worth it. Not worth it. I spent a few money and I won't get it back, basically. But back to this poem about the women arriving. So I remember reading about how they arrived on horseback, but they also leave on horseback. And at the end, as you say, kind of like they've made that wonderful grotesque tapestry of skulls for weights and some like a spearhead for a shuttlecock and intestines for the warp and the weft. It's like, it's something you'd find kind of like in a York or London dungeon, dungeon ride kind of thing, or in a horror film. It's delightful to read. But I also like the aspect of when you do actually read the actual source text, that they also have like a song that they sing whilst they do it. I thought that's also a really nice touch because it could, it's like a magical spell, because like they're singing as they're doing it, because it can match the warp and the weft and the actions of them
Galdra.
doing it.
It's Galdra.
Galdr, yeah.
Yes.
It was important in Sather
Yes.
Yes, and then to clarify for viewers and listeners, Sather or Cedar, as I often pronounced it, obviously wrong. So thank you for that educational tip. Is a magic strongly associated with just the women? It's not a male masculine dominated thing. And I remember reading very early on, when I first deep dived into Norse mythology, how Loki would tease Odin for getting Freya to teach him cedar, like, oh, Odin, you wear a dress because you do cedar magic. And I'm like, yes, he does. Interesting.
And watch out, because he'll get you.
Oh, yes. Odin is just as tricksy as Loki. He's just clever at it, or cleverer at it, in that he doesn't think he is a trickster. That's a whole other topic.
So that's why he's an interesting character, because he personifies both of those things. He's like this like god that kings, like would, like on the eve of a battle, they would maybe do sacrifices or toasts to Odin, and yet he does this women's magic, and then there's that little pendant of maybe it's Odin wearing a dress, and it's so interesting that he's, he gives his eye for wisdom, and yet he also, they call it, like they throw a spear over like the the opposing army to Odin. So it's like all these different aspects to his character. I know we're talking about Valkyrie, but I mean, he is related to that conversation. I think it speaks to like how these misconceptions about the Vikings, that they were just these dumb brutes. Like when you have a god like Odin or Freya that are so multifaceted and they have all these different aspects to them, that speaks to like their minds are working in different ways. They're not just a bunch of beasts who want to go out and kill everything. So anyway, that always makes me...
That's a good point.
Everything was by memory. They weren't illiterate. They did have writing, but because they kept everything in their minds had to be very highly trained. So, they weren't dumb. No, they weren't mindless brutes by any stretch.
It kind of irritated me. There was an Instagram post from the BBC, I think, is it Ian Glenn doing some sort of audiobook or something? And they put that one of the things that compared to other civilizations, societies, cultures, the Vikings were illiterate. And I was like,
they weren't.
What?
I know. Just because they didn't write things down does not mean that they were illiterate. The Irish didn't write things down until they Christianized either, but they were far from illiterate.
No, it's just a weird bias that we still have in terms of, I mean, one thing I always point to is the fact that runestones were public. That you're not going to put it out there if people can't read it.
Otherwise, what's the point?
Exactly.
Well, and also they found lots and lots of pieces of wood with runes scraped in them. And Bergen is one of the places where they found a lot, but they found them elsewhere as well, to see that, people did write in runes all the time.
See
up
goods
through the medieval period, really. And it wasn't just magic spells. It was also just notes. Come home now.
Pick up bread on your way home.
Yeah, pretty much.
Or their equivalent.
So that's pretty casual literacy. It means that most people were probably literate in the Viking Age. It's a little off topic there, but I think it's important to help give the whole picture of, of people of that time period.
Absolutely. You need to understand the people to understand how these gods and indeed mythical figures like the Valkyries probably were, or hopefully, possibly were. We can't say for sure, because there is no definite book. No one's gone back in time yet and actually asked them what they think. And I think this is the real problem, especially with a lot of Norse mythology generally. It's too open to interpretation, because there is, like, unlike the Bible, that's been set down by a lot of men over many centuries, saying this happened and this happened and this happened. We don't want that story. That's going in the archive, never to be seen again. This happened and this happened, this happened. We unfortunately have to, well, I say unfortunately, I know a lot of academics now are being more critical of how Snorri interprets it, because he was a Christian. He had an agenda behind his works, which did have a lot of the legends on, but he also went on about kingship and stuff, because it was a present for prince or a king to be, at least.
A king. It was
from what,
Norway.
yeah, from what I remember. So he wasn't doing it just so everyone knew what their ancestors believed in, because of course, as you said, Johanna, these were oral stories. These were probably told for a lot longer, with more variants possibly, when you think of all the different types of storytellers and the regional differences and how they had to cater for different audiences, like anyone normal person would. Like, you wouldn't tell the same story about a pig crossing a road to the farmer, yeah, you tell a different story to a king. You'd make it a bit more regal, a bit more royal, a bit more reflective of honouring them. Think of like Egil Skallagrimsson, kind of like in his epic poetry to Eric the Red, always trying to save his head. He was always trying to tailor to his audience. So I do think there was probably more variation than we ever realised. And the stories are of such an age that we cannot tell, because we do not know who originally told them. And a lot of the time that these are written down in sources that we have today, we don't know who wrote them down. We don't know who that person spoke to when they were writing it down. And speaking of Valkyries, of course, if anyone's been following my ramblings online, they will know that I've been deep diving into Brynhilde a lot for the past 2 years, and discovering the stories that came before her epic performance, I say performance, kind of appearance, not just in the Nibelungliad, but also kind of like in the Saga of the Volsungs, and she's also in the Poetic Edda. Again, 3 different sets of stories, all slightly different, but they all feature in some degree. Although it's the Icelandic one that mentions her specifically being a Valkyrie exiled by Odin. That there was a set of stories about Valkyries before her, like the second poem of Helgi Hundingsbane, which I actually enjoyed reading just because it was so incredibly out of this world. It was a bit like reading a Toe Pratchett novel. Kind of like, oh, I'm a hero, I'm going off, and then I have to find a name for myself. Oh, pretty lady, can you please give me a name? I'm like, that's just so bizarre. But at the end of that,
is that the one where he refers to her as a sparkling girl? I think I think it's what Helgi. Yeah,
I can't remember.
I don't know.
There's 3 different versions of Helgi, which is weird because he keeps getting reincarnated, which brings me to the point where at the end of Helgi Hundingsbane's second poem, there's this little note left by the scribe, and we'll never know who they are, and I will curse them to this day. And they say kind of like, oh, our ancestors used to believe in reincarnation. We don't believe in this type of thing anymore. It's an old wives' tale. But there is a poem that follows this one called The Song of Kara, because both Helgi and his Valkyrie love Sigrun both get reincarnated. We don't have the Song of Kara, but we know it existed. And that is incredibly infuriating for someone who wants more, such as myself. And it's just an indication of what other stories could have been lost, because we had Christian men writing stories that were told centuries before they were Christian, that didn't really appreciate them, that didn't really possibly like them, maybe. And they obviously selected what stories kept. And Snorri himself kind of, I mean, I know you've mentioned this in your own book, Sif, and I've read it in other books, such as Johanna, Frederick's daughter. That's it. Yep, she's written an amazing book about Viking women throughout the Viking Age, but also touches very well on the mythology and the mythological representation of women. And Nancy Marie Brown, on her book, The Real Valkyrie, which is more about Shieldmaidens. It's inspired by the Berka 261, whatever that number was, the male warrior that is the female warrior. 581, thank you. They both kind of say the same thing, that Snorri probably chose what stories he put together, and therefore we could have had stories about Freya, about Frigg, about Idun, but we don't. What we have is what we have because he chose them. Sorry, I will stop my TED rant now.
No, I totally understand, because my character Queen Osa got 2 paragraphs, and she ruled alone for 18 years. We know that, but we don't know anything about that entire 18 years. It picks up again when her son Halfdan is of age and takes over. We don't even know what happened to her. No idea, because Snorri left it out. I'm sure somebody knew very well the whole story, and it was probably told for centuries, if not longer.
I mean, there's just so much knowledge that humanity's lost, and this is the tip of the iceberg just on this one particular subject, this one particular group of people and their particular beliefs. Speaking of kind of like little references, I know Snorri is particularly the one to point to when people start pairing Valkyries with the goddess Freya instead of Odin, of course, because stereotypically it's always like, yep, the Valkyries serve Odin, he sends them out to go bring the dead back, and that's it. And that brings the whole question of agency. But it's Snorri who references some type of poem or source that says, actually Freya gets the first pick of all the dead brought back, and they go to her hall, and then whoever's left goes to Odin's. But it's just that brief, simple reference. That's all we have to even indicate that Freya had a role as a goddess of battle, or at least death, as much as Odin did. So what are your thoughts on that, ladies?
It is interesting. It's wheresoever she rides into the strife, isn't it? That section, that line. I can't remember what I specifically put in the book, but I was kind of thinking of this split that happens in Scandinavia between like Frigg and Freya, and whether Freya emerged from kind of like the Valkyrie kind of like schemer, for lack of a better word, into her own figure. That's a bit of a kind of I'm not married to that idea. It is a bit out of left field, but there's this idea of maybe again Snorri drawing from more classical things and kind of giving Freya a little bit more of a, again, agency, I guess would be the way to put it, and kind of giving her more of these deathly battle aspects. What I particularly enjoy, as a slight tangent, is that Odin is an anomaly within the kind of Norse mythology, in that he is kind of the only masculine death figure that we have in a field of very feminine death like goddesses. And yeah, I think there's something there that irks me, for lack of a better word. There is something there that feels older than, again, the surrounding text. Something that, I don't know, that I think it's David Varley that said that Odin is a kind of like an interference. He is he is inserting himself in something, which is
well, one thing you pointed out in your book, because I just read this a couple days ago, was that Freya was not actually listed as a hostage. I didn't. You really have to read between the lines, because I've always assumed she was one of the hostages. That's what I've always read. But you point out that she was not. She was not one of the hostages from the Vanir. So we don't really know exactly how she ended up in Asgard, and how she ended up, or did she even end up in Asgard, really? Or was she just a visitor? Where was her realm? Where was Folkvanger? Was it in Asgard, or where? We know so little, just these tiny clues. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I would never have known if I hadn't read that in your book.
Yeah, it's what I tend to kind of justify all of it with is that Snorri and a lot of the writers do go out of their way to not mention any goddesses. If the option is there, they'll skip over it. Saxo being particularly bad.
Yeah. Kim and I we did one episode on our podcast about goddesses, 2 episodes, but we really had to scrape to find anything other than their names.
I have something I'm working on at the moment, is a book on Sif, in that, again, very, very little on her. So little. But her kennings are quite revealing. There's a really cool kenning of saying the wolf of Sif was hardly hungry. And that is interesting, considering that we really only have wolves and feminine figures that are Jotnar, or Valkyries even, and they tend to be associated with potentially Jotnar origins. Hyrrokin being obviously not a Valkyrie, but she is a Jotun woman who is associated with wolves. And I've always thought that there's something there between Saxa and Sif that feels, especially considering Saxa can mean to shear as well. So it's I've been kind of on a weird kind of like rabbit hole down that like thing of like sheared head. Is this where we're going? Is this kind of and all the confusion around whether Saxas are Haiti for Sif. But yeah, that's one thing. There is little things here and there with goddesses and Valkyries equally that hints at something more that is omitted. And yeah, it's not complete erasure. I mean, Rebecca, as you said earlier about Kara the lay of Kara is completely gone. We don't have it. But we do have a fragment of Kara turning into a swan and kind of continuing that legacy of the kind of the Valkyrie reincarnation cycle, as I've called it. But yeah, there's things that persist. Nevertheless, she persisted.
They sneak through somehow.
Yeah, it endures.
Well, I think it's interesting, like, so they're associated with, swans, and then there's stories where they have like a swan cape. I forget the name of the story, where the guys steal their capes and basically abduct them for 7 years. But then they're also like, I don't know, they can fly on their horses, they ride wolves with, so what is, I personally like the riding the wolves one the best, but but
there's a lot of crossover between the different supernatural women.
Yeah.
And you point that out in your book. And we also I think we did a podcast on that quite a long time ago about, there's multiple, there's the Fylgja, and there's the Hamingja, and the Disir. They're also fascinating, and they have so many crossover characteristics, but are they the same? Are they different? We don't have any way of knowing for sure how they're differentiated, but there's so many different supernatural women that it's really, and then the Nornir as well.
It's made more confusing by the fact that the Norse poetry liked calling things other things.
Kennings.
Yeah, exactly. Kennings, Haiti, all of that. But it was like a wink to the audience at the time. But for us, it's like, are they actually calling them Disir? Are they actually calling them like Hamingja? I mean, or is it just, this would be a reference at the time where they'd be like, oh, and this is just how we do poetry, and we're calling them these things. I'm reminded of Viga Glum's saga, where we have a Valkyrie figure that appears in a dream, but she's called, I think, if memory serves, like a Hamingja. She is a Hamingja woman, and that's fascinating because there's alternative verses that make it very clear it's actually a Valkyrie. There's Hollander's translation says warrior choosing, and very explicitly, I think the Edward Head, or whatever his name was, that did the translation I most read up on, it calls her, what does he say? Something about goddess of the sword and spear. So there is this kind of like clash of mixture. I call it like the semantic weakening, as it were. There is these shared characteristics over time that melt into each other and really make it annoying for us who are trying to demarcate. But at the time, there was probably an understanding that these figures were a little bit fluid. Or on the other hand, there was an acknowledgement that this was just, we were referring to one thing as another, like referring to a goddess with another name of a goddess and all of this sort of thing. So yeah, it's hard to untangle.
It really is. And I can see where like Hamingja is luck, and the Fylgja and the Disir, I could see how they could kind of be interwoven, not necessarily the same thing, but somehow, guardian spirits, but also the luck of the person.
Well, and you also have to think about the way poetry is constructed. So sometimes they might have just needed to use a different name because they wanted the alliteration, or maybe the meter required them to shorten something or lengthen something, so they just called it something different. It could have not meant anything other than just the needs of the poem.
Yeah. and then you kind of like have that thought when you're researching, like, am I just looking too deeply into this?
Yeah.
Well, Hamingja is something you could lend to someone. You could lend them your luck. So what did that mean? Did your spirit woman go to them and help them? Because there's certainly some some sagas that say that. I forget which one it was, but someone's grandfather died, or his father died, and he saw this giant woman following his ship, and he realized that was, the Disir, or the Hamingja of his father, who had come to. He inherited her protection. Didn't own her, but the protection that she brought.
And I didn't realize until I was rereading some stuff in Neil Price's book, The Viking Way, about Fylgja. I don't know, I didn't register it, or anyway, that they're all female. And I don't know why I didn't realize that a long time ago, but I was like, oh, that's interesting that these little guardian spirits are always female.
It's certainly kind of like when you mentioned about kind of like the Desir kind of like being, I always understood them to be kind of like female spirits that could be related to fate. Or of course, luck. I wasn't quite familiar with the luck spirits because although I have Neil Price's book, I haven't read it cover to cover.
Oh, God, me neither.
I plowed the chapters on Valkyries, and that's all I needed at the time. But I know certainly kind of like in fiction, the Desir do come up a few times, but not as much. Certainly at the time when I went to Norway to speak about Valkyries, and somehow academics were happy to listen, there was a book that came out called simply The Valkyrie by Kate Hartfield. I don't know if any of you have read it.
I've read it.
Okay. I recommend it. I personally enjoyed it, just generally, because I just like anything with Valkyries in it. But she has creatively, as part of the creative license of modern authors today, and because no one can put their hand up and say, no, Kate, that isn't true, that didn't happen. She's presented a mythological world where Odin does have the Valkyries, but Freya has the Desir. And at battlefields, there's a bit of a competition between who can claim the most souls, the Desir or the Valkyries. But what I really liked was how much she really revealed of Odin's character. And of course, dear readers and listeners, we are speaking about Odin again, but he is so intrinsically linked to the Valkyrie conception of today through both good and bad reasons. But I really liked how she revealed him to be the genuine manipulator of war and causes of death that he is in the book, but yet he's powerless to recruit all these dead people. He needs the Valkyries to do it, and that is why I saluted Kate for at the end of the book, because Brynhild, who is the key character in this, it's based on her epic stories of stories. It's Kate's version. She's taken all sorts of sources and blended them together really well. And how Brynhild basically calls him out on it. Kind of like, well, she inspires her Valkyrie sister to call him out on it. She doesn't do it directly for various reasons. I'm trying not to spoil it too much. But they basically say, no, we're not going to do this anymore, Odin. You're working us too hard. You're causing too many battles, too many deaths. We cannot keep up. Kind of like, we're going to go now. And he's like, oh, but please come back. I need you. And I'm like, yes, you need them, Odin, not the other way around. And this brings the whole topic to agency. Because, of course, Snorri's always gave the impression that Odin gives them orders, they go do it, and then they serve the meat at the end of the day. So kind of, what are your thoughts on agency? How much agency do you think the Valkyries had, should have had, or did?
Well, in my opinion, they had a lot of agency. They might have been mead servers, but so were queens. That was not a menial task. It was an honorific. When the queens served the mead, they were setting the order in the hall. So they were in command. It wasn't a menial task. It wasn't like being a barmaid. Mm-hmm. So right then and there, I think the whole idea of, the mead server is not a menial situation. So that's definitely my take on that.
Agreed. It's one of those things where I think when I first got into it, there was a little bit of pushback from me in kind of that image. But I think it's something that through the modern lens can seem a bit demeaning. But when you start getting into that idea of like ritualized mead hall, kind of like politics and social systems, then you realize actually this was a frith keeping exercise. This was a very vital role in terms of making sure that their world worked in terms of their politics and day-to-day affairs. So for me, agency, I do tend to lean more on the side of that was their original kind of idea, and as they kind of evolved and adapted, kind of like in the Nordic world, and all these conversion came in and everything evolved and adapted and changed and all of that they had to kind of change to what people were kind of thinking in terms of gender roles and the kingly nature of kind of like of a masculine kind of like hierarchy kind of. And yeah, so they had to kind of fit into the mold of Valhalla mead bringing and that aspect. That's how they thrived in that place, in that time period. But yeah, I tend to see it as Brynhilde, Sigdrifa being an anomaly, being, I tend to say, I think, an addition, which kind of, I don't know whether I like that wording now, but that is the only example. If I personally consider them as two of the same figures, Brynhilde being more of the Germanic swan maiden kind of inclusion at a later date. But yeah, that's the only example of that time where we had Odin having a preference, being angry at the wrong choice. Every other time we have just continual affirmations of the Valkyries choose, they chose, Odin didn't have a preference, he just sent them out there. So that's where I tend to lean. I tend to go into that very like, no, they were originally, and now they had rules and all that stuff at a later date.
And it was in their names. I mean,
I was just about to say that.
Not just, they weren't the corpse picker-uppers. They were the choosers. They could have used a different verb in their names.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I mentioned it in the book as well about the Historia Langobardorum, where you have this more continental setting where you have Guthan and I think it's Freya. It's a Frigg Freya kind of like combo. And Odin again doesn't have any choice there, and this is a very early work. And it's Freya, the Freya figure, that is essentially choosing for him. In the Longbeards, it's the origin of their name, that tribe. But so yeah, there is this continual idea that perseveres of Odin or his kind of a like figure, basically having some sort of afterlife role, but not being the one to actively choose.
How about you, Kim?
Well, yeah, what they said. But yeah, the first thing that came into my head was like their name. That's right there, choosers.
And it's kind of a sports thing. So it depends on your performance on the battlefield whether you get chosen or not. So it's almost like a football match or something where it's the performance of the warrior that is going to get his or her place in the other afterlife, whether it's Freya's or Odin's hall.
Well, in my book, I deal with Odin. The reason why my character's husband got chosen is because he was laughing at the end. It was like him protecting his king or whatever, and they were far outnumbered, and he was just laughing and joking, and whichever. I think it was Gondel took him because she liked that he was laughing at the end.
So they definitely have agency in your book.
Yeah, I think they do serve. They do serve me, but I think, oh no, I might be thinking of a different book I started to write and then didn't keep going. But yeah, it was more like what Johanna was talking about. And I did that with my Viking, but my regular, historical fiction books too. The wife of my Jarl, she is she does serve the mead, but she says the ritual words over the mead, and then she has her husband drink out of it. Yeah, she does the whole here are the most important people and goes around. And they respected her for it, and it was an honor for her to do that, and they all honored her for it.
I certainly agree, and I guess we should clarify for viewers, and this is kind of like the term Valkyrie or the Valkyria, if I can pronounce the Old Norse pronunciation, does translate as chooser or choosers of the slain. I never remember if it's got a plural or a singular. But as you say, Johanna, the word choice and it's linked to agency, it always made me think that back to an even grander term of judgment, making that decision.
Yes.
And that's what I kind of led with my humble attempt to get into the same book as Johanna. In that I kind of took a pinch of salt, thought, well, okay, if they're choosing, they must be judging. I'm like, where does judging come in? And then I decided to blend Freya into the mix and make her kind of be the first Valkyria, the first chooser, the first embodiment of the spirit of judgment, and have her mum be the Volva who gave Odin the prophecy. And Odin had pissed the veneer off by going off and digging up the Volva to interrogator and Freya went there and tried to appease the spirits and just got taught the ways of the Valkyria by her very ancient mother, and all that jazz. I enjoyed writing it. I certainly liked giving Freya definitely a role in the battle, albeit with a lot of seed urge shape-shifting magic as well, because she has her own falcon cloak, which again is another connection through to these Valkyries being known as swan maidens, having their swan feather cloaks, because no other people have cloaks besides Freya and the Valkyries that can fly. I don't think even Loki can fly. Well, he can turn into a fly. He did that.
Well,
with
he has to borrow Freya's cloak to fly. Remember, in one of the myths, he does borrow her cloak.
Yes,
that's the one where the Jotuns stole Thor's hammer.
The Lay of Thrym, one of my favourites.
I love that one too.
Or in a dress. Freya is really angry when she's first asked, and the ground shakes and the house trembles and the cats all hide. And then Loki goes, well, actually, it's because Thor's hammer's missing. And she goes, oh. Okay, yes, fine. That's an emergency. Yes, you can have my feather cloak.
And I love how much fun they have dressing him up and everything, and then Loki getting dressed up. Yeah, that's a fun one. And so it just shows that they also had a sense of humor, right?
Oh,
so
they had an incredible sense of humor.
People who think they're just a bunch of brutes don't know anything about Vikings. They've never studied past, like, I don't know, some meme or whatever, but it's like the way they decorated their houses and their halls, they painted things, they had beautiful carvings, and man.
Well, how about when Loki made Skathi laugh?
Oh yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Tying his beard to the testicles of a goat and playing tug of war.
No, it was the other way around. It was the beard of the goat to his testicles.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
The worst version.
And then when Loki was squealing is what made her laugh.
That would make anybody laugh.
Especially since he's the one causing all the problems. So
he got his just desserts.
But certainly kind of like on the topic of modern representation of mythology, of course, most of our viewers and listeners, when they hear the word Valkyrie, they'll think kind of like long flowing hair, winged helmet, like the epic one behind you, Sif, on your shelf over there.
Oh, yeah.
As you ladies have mentioned, kind of skimpy armor, and that I'm sure that's a revolving ripple from the effect of female representation in fantasy games as well. Wings, or winged horses, or horses but no wings, or swan feather cloaks. There's so many variations, but then all these little things that were kind of like, okay, that's a Valkyrie if she has that, and that's a Valkyrie if she has this. Like I know, Kim, you mentioned how you're quite taken with the idea that they rode wolves instead of horses. It is in the literature, it is in the sources, but so it's not often the popular image that's put forward. And I think there's only one, out of all the Valkyrie fiction that I've read, there's only one fictional universe where the Valkyries don't say ride wolves, because these wolves are anthropomorphic and then they can shapeshift from their human form into their wolf-ish form, but then they don't get ridden on as such. They're just like kind of like beefy, furry escorts for the Valkyries. And the Valkyries in that universe don't even have agency. They get given a list and a destination, and they literally go and pick up a dead body and bring it back. That's but this is the spectrum that I've been working with, and it's why I've been so fascinated, because we know so little. It's been absolutely remarkable to see how over time, like in like 20 years that I've been reading all this stuff, they're interpreted differently but equally unique. That it's so malleable, and it's kind of like an evolution of Pokemon almost. They're all Pokemon, but they're all different. You know?
I wrote a blog post once about the evolution of Batman and the evolution of Valkyries, because Batman has changed a lot. Like originally, and now it's been, I don't know, 3 or 4 years since I wrote that. Originally he used a gun, and it's only more recent that somebody decided, oh, well, if his parents were killed by a gun, so he's never going to use guns. And there were some other things about Batman that have changed over the years because society changes. And I was just kind of equating that to the way that the Valkyries have changed. Because society changes, we just need something different, apparently, from our mythological and our legendary figures. So now we want Valkyries to have agency. Right. And so we find that, and then we go and we look, and we're like, yeah, there's a lot of stories where they do have agency, and we're like, look at their names. This is what it means. But maybe in the Victorian period, they just wanted some kind of weird male fantasy about what maybe they would be. So they were something different, because that's all they were looking for.
The scholars were male. They weren't female.
And they were all male
back at that time. So now we have a lot of women who are very interested in Viking studies, you know, and they are looking at women's roles, not just Valkyries, but, you know, whether Shieldmaidens were real and what was it really like to be a woman in Viking times. And it's a fascinating subject because it's really evolving right now.
They're asking new questions, not just of like the literature, but the archaeology as well, which is a wonderful thing.
Oh, honestly, I want to sigh every time I hear about it's not a potential woman because these are just the ceremonial weaponry. I was like, where was that justification when it was a male assumed grave?
Yeah, exactly.
And the way that people just, I've mentioned this on the podcast before, the way they just bent over backwards to try to deny that BJ 581 was a woman, like everything. Oh, it wasn't her bones. Somebody had moved it and put somebody else's bones. La, 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 you know, just.
But the original archaeologists had actually written the grave number on the bones and labeled them all, as well as drawing them in situ. So yeah, there's just no way.
And I think the one these days is, there's no evidence on the skeletal remains of weaponry injuries. And I'm like, she said right off the bat that the remains were too partial to make any such conclusions. And it's
the skull is missing.
Yeah. And I'm like,
the skull is missing. So
yeah, that's one of my pet peeves at the moment.
Yeah.
Just...
And maybe this person didn't die in battle, but
you know, I'm probably not going to die in battle, but you know, I might. Most of my injuries were soft tissue, so they wouldn't show up in archaeology. But
yeah, you know, you can see some of it but if the bones are pretty well decayed, then there's not going to be enough evidence in the bones to find injuries. So,
but they don't have any of those qualms when they thought the bones were male. So, or if they thought the bones in the grave were male, then of course the weapons were weapons. They weren't, you know, or even you know, a staff when they find what they think might be sorceress is like, that was a spit for roasting meat.
A roasting spit, yes. A meat spit.
Yeah.
Not even close.
We can't even admit that maybe it was a magical staff. So.
Well, a lot of people can now. The world is changing a lot, especially the archaeological world. So that's all in the past.
Well, sticking with the topic of the Berka warrior, as I often have read or refer to her just because I can never remember the number, and from my own research and the corrections and revisions I've had to make, you know, just to get it through to anywhere near academic publishing, there is, of course, the conception and perception of Shieldmaidens and Valkyries either being one and the same or not. So what are your thoughts on that angle?
Well, which came first? Were there women warriors first that gave the idea of a Valkyrie? Did women warriors inspire the concept of Valkyries? Or was it the other way around? But I have a feeling that it was women warriors that came first. Yeah, and then Valkyries grew out of them.
I think I don't have much of an opinion on which one came first. It's something I haven't really thought about, but they are definitely different. I think there is this reflex to just kind of one's mythologized, so both of them are, you know, and equate them for that purpose of like, well, they're just legendary, you know, and no basis in reality, which unfortunately some prominent scholars still think. But yeah, there's definitely a separation. One is definitely based more in reality, and one's more mythologized. But yeah, that's I find that to be just an argument against the existence of Shieldmaidens is potentially sometimes.
Yeah, I'd never thought about which one might come first either. But yeah, I think they're separate. I think they're different.
Certainly, kind of like Shieldmaidens do a pop up, I guess, in the literature, maybe a bit more than the Valkyries do, because of what limited sources we have for Valkyries.
Maybe.
I don't know, though. There's not that many Shieldmaidens in the land.
There aren't.
I want to say Nancy Marie Brown says there's like 43 instances of Shieldmaidens or Shieldmaiden figures, and we have 50 one or something named Valkyrie. So it's just there's a tiny pip to the post on that one. Yeah, that is interesting. What I find very interesting is that despite the fact that Saxo goes out of his way to dismiss the importance of most feminine figures and beings, he does point out a rather interesting situation where I cannot remember the name of the guy, but he dresses up as a Shieldmaiden to escape someplace. And I was pointing out that, well, surely if he wants to escape a place, then he's not going to disguise himself as something particularly interesting or noteworthy, something that would be getting him recognized. To the point where, aren't you just kind of justifying the fact that this isn't something noteworthy or interesting or of particular, interest to people, something that would not spotlight him as
something unusual?
Yeah, exactly.
He didn't want to stand out. Maybe there were a lot of shield maidens.
That's a good point.
And so it's and we do have an instances, but anyway, let's carry on.
No, I was simply going to kind of like add on, kind of like to Johanna, saying about maybe they were a lot, and certainly the Vikings, the History Channel series has certainly established that as an actual active thing in a lot of popular minds of the 21st century, because they had a lot in the casting. And of course, following the famous Lagertha, who of course was Ragnar Lothbrok's mistress wife, however how long before he met Aslog, who also claims, or at least in the sources, she has a very, very connection back to Sigurd and Brunhilde. And I know when I was studying the Saga of the Volsungs, as well as Brunhilde appearing in the Poetic Edda. Well, no, maybe it is the Saga of the Volsungs. No, it's the Poetic Edda. No, Volsungs. I keep getting the sources too confused, because this is the thing with Brunhilde. She's kind of like mentioned too many stories in too many variants. Like in the Nibelungia, she's like the Queen of Iceland. Nothing mythical about that. She's just the Queen of Iceland. But as well as kind of like her basically first lines to Sigurd, kind of being, oh yeah, so he didn't put me here because I disagreed with his choice of the king. I wanted the younger one. He wanted the older one, so I picked the younger one, and here I am. After that, he meets her at her foster father's place, and she's with a bower and with her maidens, she's sewing. But then her foster brother says, oh yes, Brynhild's always putting on a helmet and running off to battle with the men. She's not like her, not like my sister, who's like married to my father, kind of like my father. Anyway, it's not like the wife of the actual fortress whole thing that was actually very, very good and very good at stitching and very good at embroidery. Brynhild would much rather grab her shield and sword and run off. So I thought that's a really interesting choice to keep in, both as a scribe or as an oral source. Kind of like, why kind of say she's really good in her bow with her ladies, but then also she wants to go and do this other thing. It's that duality, that dual nature that I think has been picked up by a lot of scholars when looking at Valkyries in these kind of narratives where they start off fine and free and kind of like able to go off and play with the boys and battle in long ships and raids and whatnot. But then as soon as their father, brother, or foster father says, right, you're in your 20s now, love, you need to settle down and marry. I found this lovely man, can you come and meet him? And then they just give it all up, and then they become that kind of like the housewife or the hall maid or whatever you want to call it. And it's interesting how even in the stories, it's the male patriarchy that ultimately switches that kind of freedom on or off. They don't really regain it afterwards.
That's in the stories that are written by men. So I don't think it really had any bearing on reality. And when I write about women in the Viking Age, I try to portray the fact that they did cook and sew and weave and fight and hunt and went to sea. They could be a captain of a ship and still go home and make dinner, but everyone, men and women, all participated in survival in the Viking Age. They all had to get the crops in. There were some things that were specifically women's domain, but everyone had to work. Everyone, king and queen, everyone had to work in the Viking Age. It really was not a matter of choice that you could go sit in your bower and embroider. Because the embroidery from the 9th century, from the Oseberg burial ship, appears to be ritualistic. It certainly wasn't for pleasure. It seemed to be a ritual tapestry. And so it was done with ceremony, just like any sacrifice. Saxo Grammaticus lived in a different time when maybe women could be go sit in their bower and not go out and hunt and fish and get the crops in like everyone else. I think the view of what it might have been like to live during the Viking Age is a little distorted in these manuscripts.
No. And of course, kind of like you had to be quite well off to even have a bower and maids to sew with. Because as you say, kind of like if you were just a lowly fisher's wife and kind of like he happened to have an accident or be ill and not be able to go fish, well, what are you going to do? You've got nothing to either eat, let alone sell at market or trade or that kind of thing. And it reminds me of another author friend and previous guest, Caitlin Felix, who wrote her debut historical novel, Rand's Daughters, which is a really good historical fiction adventure, purely with women as the central cast, and they have their own little crew and they all have their own different backgrounds and reasons for why they've left their brothers or their husbands or their fathers, and their fondness not began. And I was really impressed with how she personified it, because she was literally a wife of a fisherman who drowned rather sadly on a fishing expedition, and so she had to take up a trade of some sort, and somehow she found herself an old ship, repaired it, and then went out and started collecting and trading and being a connection just as much as the other male ship owners and sailors around that time, because they weren't just all raiding. Everyone thinks of Vikings equals raiding. They weren't raiding, they were trading. They were explorers, they were craftsmen, they were poets,
many things.
and of course yes, and of course, who knows kind of like how many stories or poems may have been kind of like influenced by women writers, not just male, because there must have been women storytellers as much as male storytellers, I think.
Yeah, isn't there?
I'd like to think so.
There's a theory that Laxdæla saga is written by a woman, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there was a poet that we know of Jorunn Skaldmeier. I forget which king she was a poet for. She's the only female poet that we know of.
But at least she was mentioned by name.
Some herald something.
One of the heralds.
One of the heralds, I think.
Yeah. So in my short story, I have five farm girls who their family can't support all the kids. So some of them have to leave, and these 5 sisters leave to go become Shieldmaidens. They go to join Osa and become Shieldmaidens. That's their goal in life, their dream.
It was Harold Finehair. She was one of his poets.
And he was one of the first ones that was really recorded where we would know, the name, the name of the people.
So I guess to round this rather absolutely fascinating conversation off, because I know we could literally talk all evening or all afternoon in your case on this subject. We've touched a lot on the historical sources and the classical and the Victorian, the Romantic era. But what are all your thoughts about how Valkyries are represented or perceived or even understood for modern audiences today? Do you think Marvel has done them any favours? Do you think fiction of the type that I've been reading has done them any favours? Or do you think there's still more that is being selected but not kept, maintained, so to speak, characteristics or otherwise?
Oh, I have a favourite depiction in today, and it might come out of a bit of left field because I know some people disagree with me on this, but I'm particularly fond of the God of War Valkyries. I think they capture that duality, those two sides of the coin, quite well. Obviously, in the first game, they're I think it's described as they've been driven mad because they've been given corporeal form for too long, and they're kind of like they're fighting with the main character, and they're trapped. They can't escape. But so you have to. The justification is you have to kill the Valkyries to let them kind of become incorporeal again and go off. But in the second game, they've been kind of cured of this illness, I guess. And I'm a bit annoyed because they call them Shieldmaidens at that point, but. They're more of the kind of like stately, almost romanticized sort of appearance. In fact, one of the main Valkyries there, Sigrun, who's described as the previous queen of the Valkyries, is in a romantic relationship with Mimir, which is, if you're familiar with that game, he's just the head.
How does that work?
yeah. It's sweet. they're talking in a tent at one point.
I'm only interested in your mind.
Exactly. It's but yeah, I quite like that also because they're just very badass looking. They're covered in like metal armor and like they have wings, but it's like more kind of like engineered almost. There's something very kind of non-organic about them. And their armor just looks really cool as well. It's and they're the hardest bosses in the game. You know, they're given respect within that kind of setting. And then that carries over into the second one when you've got Nar as well, who's not a Valkyrie in the literature, but is made one here. And she's the hardest boss in that game as well. So I enjoy it. There's something great there. And again, I have to say for Marvel, I wish they gave her a name. In the promotional material, I think Tessa Thompson has officially called her Brunhilde. And obviously that's her name in the comics. But yeah, it seems a little odd to just refer to her as Valkyrie or King Valkyrie, depending on the era. So it seems strange to refer to her as a title. But I have no issues. I mean, she's not really a Valkyrie. She's not doing any of the duties of a Valkyrie. She is just ex-Valkyrie.
Well, I guess that's the other thing, kind of in the cinematic universe, there is no Asgard, there's no Odin, there's no Valhalla to go to. And yet I recently rewatched Thor Love and Thunder. Because of course I absolutely got into comics because I thought, oh, they've given Jane the hammer. I want to see what they can do. And she had such a good time in the comics, and yet she became such a Mayflower of a heroine in the film. It's ridiculous. She deserved a whole series of films, really, because that comic arc was amazing. And of course, separately, she is now in the comics the one and only Valkyrie because something else has killed off all the other Valkyries. But that's a whole other angle I'll go in. But at the end of Love and Thunder, right at the very, very end of every single credit line you can possibly read, there is a glimpse of Jane Foster waking up in Valhalla. And my immediate thought was, gosh, where are the Valkyries? And I thought, oh no, they're all dead because hell killed them all apart from one. So that's how they have a Valhalla with no Valkyries in. Although Jane gets there without the help of being or any Valkyrie at all. So does Odin, I assume. But I briefly got to see the Valkyries of the God of War game because I don't have a PlayStation. I'm one of the very few Xbox players still around. But my brother had it, and the few times I got to go home when he was playing it when it came out, I happened to be in the room when he had those big Valkyrie battles, and I couldn't do it. I can't do dodge and hack and slash. I kind of hit from afar with magic spells. Usually, that's my approach to games. But I was really impressed by kind of how they've adapted the iconic feature of the winged helmet, because they all had helmets, and I think only one had wings of any particular bird. But the others kind of all had horns or features of claws, or they were all very animalistic, and I was quite impressed with that. And I got to see him obviously kill one, take the skull, put it on the throne, they had this little empty circle of thrones for the Valkyries. And you got a little description of what each one's name was and what their role was. And I got really excited when I said, oh, that one used to be a librarian for Odin. That's amazing, because of course he hoards all this knowledge. He will need a librarian to organize it all. I never got to see the second game, of course, where there's I think it was called Ragnarok, isn't it? Where they have this series of Valkyrie things to go through, so they keep popping up. But I was surprised they never introduced a Brynhild at all either, and they stuck with the name Sigrun. But it's maybe Brynhild is just not as popular as she used to be compared to when Ragnar was around 200 years ago. Speaking of Wagner, I guess my favourite modern representation, besides popular culture, has actually been the recent Royal British Opera's cycle of The Ring, of the Nibelungniad that Richard Wagner wrote. Because I got to see Die Walküre performed live, albeit streamed to cinemas across 20 countries there were, so it's quite impressive. I don't know if it can ever reach anywhere in the States, but if it comes out with the Twilight of the Gods next year, ladies, do tune in, because Brynhild's in that one. But their Valkyries before Brynhild's epic fail of Odin and all things, basically, they were in modern attire. They were in engineer blue overalls with really big black lace-up boots on, but they were filthy. It was in their hair, it was over their face, and they were pushing along these huge metal wagons that had stylized. It almost looked like compost, but you could see there were hands and limbs and heads. So it was kind of like they were literally burying around the dead, and they were kind of like breaking them all up. It has a strong like earth ecocentric theme running through all this current arc cycle. But I just loved how filthy they were, because as we were discussing off air before I hit record, kind of like they were beautifully gruesome, and that's what they were like in that poem when they were weaving with the heads and the entrails and the spears and the weapons. And that, as I said, that's the Valkyrie I connect to, because they're just as you said, so badass. You just don't want to mess with them. They're kind of like, yeah, you kind of like do kind of like not want to meet them on the battlefield if you don't have to, kind of thing. Because as much as I understand the reasoning of explaining, oh, they're there simply to help all these men go off and face death, or the aspect of dying and not coming back, I get that. I do get that. And of course, Christianity has their angels. And I did have to make the faux pas of explaining to my daughter that Valkyries were basically the Vikings' angels. And I have got a children's book for Vikings recently. It's a series of little golden books, and it's called The Vikings. And in it describes Valkyries as angels taking dead Vikings to Valhalla, which was their heaven. So there is that strong kind of comparison, because we're in the Western world where it's all Christian. And how we're more superior than them. And long story short, I enjoyed the wagon depiction of the Valkyries most recently. Although I really do quite have a soft spot for the Marvel comic version of Jane Foster being the Valkyrie as well. Sorry, I will let you now say your speech.
Well, there was something about, them taking people to the afterlife or the underworld or whatever. But there's always someone who does that in mythology. There's the Morrigan in Celtic mythology or Irish mythology, who, like, if you see her before a battle, you're probably not going to make it through. And like Hecate was one of the goddesses of Greek mythology who would do that kind of thing. So there's often a female deity who guides. What are they called? There's a word for it, and I can never remember. Yes.
Yeah.
Which is a weird word.
It is such a weird word for what it is. They do fulfill that
role.
That role, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't add to modern depictions. I gave up on Marvel a long time ago, because I was just like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to watch TV shows and do this to have to figure out what the hell is going on. So I checked out after, I don't know, it's probably been before the pandemic. So that's how long it's been. And I just can't have video game systems in my house, because then I don't get anything done. So the last one I had was a Wii, and I gave it to my son when he moved out, and I gave him my old NES. I even had the original Nintendo, the old square one, and I gave him that too. I was just like, get these things out of my house, because that's all I want to do if they're here.
I feel that.
So
right
I haven't,
now.
I'm not that up on like modern representations of Valkyries.
Well, it goes far beyond popular culture, because I know, kind of for my own humble research, I referenced the fact that one of my favourite Dungeons and Dragons online dice stores is named Valkyrie RPG, and they have a really cool logo, and I got the t-shirt, I got the poster. I just need a Becky Cave to put it up in. There's kind of like, I found a US netball team called the Valkyries. Of course, there's I came across kind of like an equestrian training camp that was called Valkyrie Equine. Her name's been applied to, well, I say her, there, because it's a plural, so there is more than one. There is definitely more than one. The name and the imagery is definitely applied to a lot of commercial stuff and products and services, to name a few. And of course, Brynhild as well, she pops up in all sorts of popular, well, not just popular culture, but popular life, I suppose, existence and society and business and enterprise and that kind of thing. But certainly kind of like the image of them being, of course, women, but of course winged helmet, or have some type of flight and speed and agility, not to mention, of course, strength and independence and heroism and all these these new attributes. They may have been there before. We might not have been as prevalent or as strong, but we're certainly applying them now to how people think of and understand and perceive Valkyries to be.
What I do enjoy is that there is a widespread awareness of them. Chances are, if you say Valkyrie to someone, they have an image in their head, and so it makes me talking about them at conferences a lot easier, because people have, even if it might not be 100% correct, they have this idea going in, and to a degree where they're quite excited about it. There's something kind of intriguing naturally about them. But yeah, I did want to touch on briefly that as someone who does identify as heathen, it is interesting to see this commercialization of these figures. Obviously, I can't. It'd be wrong for me to gatekeep in that sort of way, but I guess I do take the lesson I take from it all is I'm just happy that they're enduring in some capacity in the kind of modern zeitgeist. So I do like the way they're adapted into various things. They're fascinating in the way that people take certain aspects and run with it.
Yeah, as Captain Sparrow once said, but you have heard of me.
Yeah.
I think when we interviewed Marianne Moan on our podcast a while back, she said, we asked her, how do you feel about the modern depictions of the Vikings? And she said, well, I haven't watched that many of them, but I'm just glad that people are interested in them. I'm glad that they've heard of them. So, it's all good.
I also love her work.
Yes. Oh, I know.
I mean, anytime I mention to anyone, and I don't really talk about being a writer that much out in the normal people's world. But anytime I do, what do you write about? I'm like, I write historical fiction set in the Viking Age. Cool. Like, it's always like, that must be really interesting. And I'm like, yeah, it's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool.
You can't really say that about much things, can you? Or just something. I'm just trying to think of an alternative. Like, chances are, if you said Viking, to most people they'd acknowledge it. But if you say something of another historical period, they might give you a bit of a blank look. But yeah, I like that. I like that as a thing.
Yeah, and the show Vikings really gave us a really good little step up there in the public world by becoming so popular. And those first couple of seasons were really very well done.
It was almost like a 21st century rise of Wagner and how he came around in the 18th century, kind of like with his operas. Because kind of like his operas are still being performed 200 years later, and the fact that kind of like people are still talking about the Vikings TV series, even though it's been like at least 10 years now since it's been out and since it's finished after so many seasons, and the fact that they even tried to do a Vikings Valhalla, again, a really odd title, sequel series, but they decided to be a bit Doctor Who and blend 3 different timelines of history together, which really would never have ever happened. Didn't happen. So it's not really kind of an if ever. It just didn't. Anyway, what I was trying to say was, I think the remarkable thing that this discussion has shown is that although there is lots out there about Valkyries, if you look deep and hard enough and try and dig through the poets, the kennings, the sagas, the legends, the romanticization, the fact that they have remained in our consciousness, and especially so prolific in the 21st century of all centuries, when, as we say, there aren't many Vikings from that time around still believing the same stories and practicing the same rituals that they did back then, because time and society and religions have swept them all aside for one reason or another. That vagueness, that ambiguity, that malleability that us creatives and readers and fans of writers in all different mediums, including businesses such as Valkyrie RPG, I do love their dice, they're able to shape them more, and that shapeness, that evolution continues them further and further into the future, and it'll be fascinating to see how they're represented in another 100 years, because I'm sure they'll still be around just as Vikings and their infamous horned helmets that didn't exist will be around. But that, again, that's another legacy of Wagner. It's all Wagner's fault, really. That we have the visuals, at least, for both Valkyries and Vikings surviving for so long. With both their accuracies and also inaccuracies to some degree. Would you all agree with that as a kind of a closing statement?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I know it's getting late for me and Sif, and it'll be heading towards tea time for Kim and Johanna. So I will wrap up this very, very exciting, and we could literally make it twice as long if we had all the time in the world, ladies. So I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day and your evening to come and basically fangirl with me about Valkyries, because it has been a real pleasure. And as you can tell, I just can't stop talking about them. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's been very fun.
Yes, it has. Nice to meet you guys.
Yeah.
Yes, and you. Both, all of you. Both, everyone.
Well, I know I've been meaning to get Sif on the podcast for a while, and Johanna and Kim, you've been previous guests, but it's been great to get you both back on, talk about your previous works, and of course new upcoming works, with you both having these titles, these short stories coming out with Flame Tree Press in the Valkyries anthology of short fiction, which does have a foreword and an introduction written by both Johanna Frederiksdottir and Nancy Marie Brown. So if anything, that's worth just getting it just for those bits, because I wasn't that overwhelmed with the introduction they did on the Loki or the Odin book, to be fair.
Agreed.
The Odin book, though, had Caroline.
It did have Caroline Larrington. It did. She was a bit dismayed, but I showed her the cover, because agreeable, the covers for these books are debatable, and that itself is reflective of why I'm doing this podcast at all. Because did Odin have a horned helmet? No. Was Loki wearing a bearskin fur wrap and wielding an axe? No. Oh, well, thanks again for joining me on the podcast, ladies. It's been a pleasure and honor. And of course, I encourage everyone to check out Shieldmaiden, Viking Women of the Norse world. I apologise, I got to send Viking world in the introduction, but it is the Norse world. But it is good. And of course, Sif recently did an episode all about Valkyries on the Nordic Mythology podcast.
Oh, cool.
With the guy there. That was a really good listening to. I was listening to
I
that whilst I was furiously writing on my article. So I was kind of like, oh yes, I'll put that in. Oh yes, I'll put that in.
Excellent.
As well as Sif's excellent book, Valkyria, Servant or Master, which was just, and also great to flick through. I haven't read it cover to cover, but I completely agree with the introduction and so many of the bits that I pulled out for my humble academic works. And of course, Johanna's got her short story coming up in the anthology from Flame Tree Press. Kim's got her new Viking fantasy love story coming up from Tarot of Love. So we've all got good things to look forward to, kind of like both Viking and Valkyrie alike. So it's all good.
Cool.
Thank you once again, ladies. It's been a pleasure.
Cool. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, Vic.